Hello, everyone. My name is Gary Gomes. I'm here to talk to you about a variety of topics, mainly Vedic astrology, and how it reflects in the world and how it helps predict various events that are happening in our real world. And so let me just give you some news. I am working with Sunil John at Saptarishi Astrology to help, to assist. I have to make that clear, to assist in putting together a large astrological event, which will happen starting July 1st. Every year, or every few months, the Saptarishi Astrology puts together a curriculum consisting of astrologers, learned astrologers from all over the world. And I've been honored to participate in these events over the past few years and assist in a minor way in organizing them. So keep that in mind. If anybody's interested in giving a lecture, if you're an astrologer and you're interested in giving a 25-minute lecture or publishing an article on astrology, please contact me for details. You can contact me at 508-525-0001. I also do astrology lessons, and I also provide astrology lessons and also do astrology readings. So you can contact me at that same number, or you can email me at garygomesg@gmail.com. That's GARYGOMES, the letter G, at gmail.com. And so if you're interested in any of those things in the Saptarishi conference, or in getting an astrology reading or in taking astrology lessons, please don't hesitate to contact me. I am slowly but surely working my way towards getting some of the interviews that I have told you about put up online. It's been a slow, tedious process, mainly because I consider myself to be a really poor editor. So it takes me a while to edit things and get them in good shape. So as you see me right now, this is pretty much how I am. This is pretty much me live on screen, because I hate to say this, but I really hate the editing process. And it's mainly because my hands are a little shaky. So if you can, and it's not a sign of aging, it's I have a neuromuscular condition, and editing becomes a bit of a challenge to clip exactly where I want it to be. So if you have any ideas for the show, any ideas for presentations, I'd be happy to entertain them. And I will hit you with some surprises on non-Vedic astrology related topics. I have done some interviews with people that will be featured in Perfect Sound Forever. One of them was an interview with R.T. Patterson, who founded a publication called Year Distributors, which was a large alternative music distribution company and fanzine from the 1970s, and also an interview with John Etheridge, who's a really wonderful guitarist. He's currently the guitarist with Soft Machine, and with Soft Machine, not Soft Michigan. So those are things that you can look forward to seeing in Perfect Sound Forever. That's my other part-time thing. that I do for out of love of music. And as I've threatened before, I will be putting up some music channels when I can actually find time. It may strike you as odd, but even when you're retired, you run out of time. I'm retired from state service, but I managed to run out of time pretty quickly. So it's a work in progress. So, but this year I've determined I'm not going to let a lot of these things go by the wayside, including my book. So those will all come to bear this year. So the less you talk about, the more you talk about it, the less you do it. So I won't talk about it anymore. So let's see what's happening in the skies right now. And one thing I did want to mention, just as a follow-up to last week, to my critique of the trial, the Trump trial, which I'm sure you're all very tired of hearing about. But one of the interesting things that came up this past week is there was an alleged email communication which came up and was published on May 29th, which indicated that somebody knew the verdict that was going to be rendered in a few days. So that will be investigated by the judge. It'll be investigated by the attorneys who were in the trial, and who knows what that'll bring about. But it was also, as I was telling you last week, Mercury was screwed up when the trial verdict was reached, and the communications were bad. Venus is a little bit hurt right now. Jupiter was definitely combust when the verdict was reached, and Venus is within 1 degree of the sun right now. So actually not quite, it's a little bit outside of that. So that's what they call a Kazemi. It's a Persian astrology term, which means essentially the significations of the planet are actually empowered by the sun. So Kazimis are not necessarily evil. They actually bring to light certain things that should be brought to light. I also think it's one of the things that causes, so if something went wrong, a Kazimi will usually, or if something is suspicious, let's say, a Kazimi will usually bring to light what that particular combination, what attributes or what faults connected with that planet were affected. I think one of the fascinating things is when I look back on the O.J. Simpson trial, I remember saying that I thought that O.J. Simpson would get off because Venus was afflicted. This was back in when I was first practicing astrology, way back in the 1990s, and so compliments to Judge Merchant. He is doing his due diligence. Saturn's aspecting Mars. That is a requirement. They want to make sure that everything's perfect. Because now again, the problem with this is you don't know what the source of this email is. It could have been something manufactured by somebody who doesn't know anybody on the jury. So, so that's, or it could be some kind of of a lie. It's interesting. So I can't judge those things, especially because we have these what I call conflicting truths in the chart. And that's what happens whenever Jupiter and Venus get together. I'm going to tell you a little secret about Jupiter and Venus. Jupiter and Venus as planets, both are good planets. Both have opposing views on what justice is or what fairness is. Okay. So Jupiter usually supports tradition. That's his function. It's tied to the order of things. Venus supports the disruptive planets, or guides them in how they can disrupt successfully. So whenever you have Venus and Jupiter, you'll have two sides on either or two sides contesting what is truth and what is reality. And this is exactly what's happening now. So Venus is slightly stronger by sign, but it's weakened by its combustion, by its proximity to the sun. Jupiter is strong because it's just past its exaltation point, but it's also stubborn. Okay, so it's in Venus's territory. It's in the territory of a planet it doesn't like. Okay, so I think one of the things you're going to see over the next few months is a lot of justification for a lot of what I would call stubborn justification for things being the way they are, and they are the way they should be because they are the way they are. And that sounds confusing. I realize it is. So you'll hear a lot of things saying, well, things are the way they're supposed to be. It can't get much better. It can't get, it can't get. And Venus is always going to say, well, you can certainly change things for the better all the time. Okay. So Venus is a planet connected with reform. Jupiter is a planet. They're both connected with forms of justice. So that doesn't mean that Jupiter isn't just. But Jupiter does, at least from what I've seen in the way it's functioned in various charts, is very generous. It's slow, steady, methodical in terms of how it reaches its judgment, but it's very slow to reform. Okay, so essentially, it's considered to be one of the few planets that can control Rahu, although Venus can, but Venus will encourage Rahu to perpetuate change. One thing that I have noticed, especially in the world of politics, is that people have gotten a lot more aggressive over the past few weeks and a lot more defensive over the past few weeks than they have been for the past few months. And I think that's in part because of the Saturn aspect of Mars, but also because Mars is in Aries, is in a nakshatra called Ashvini, which is intended to heal things, but it also disrupts things because it's under the control of Ketu. So you'll hear a lot more arguments about people trying to heal things. You'll hear more blatant lies coming from both sides. So I think that, or they'll be more obvious. They won't be as cleverly hidden because Mars and Mercury aren't close enough to do that kind of a dance with the facts that they normally do. So it should be interesting. So, and like I said, this is true not only of the Democrats or the progressives across the world, but also the conservatives across the world. So, and this isn't just limited to the United States. I think it's kind of fascinating to see what's happening in other countries because we're so focused on the United States, um, at least people in the United States are, but we don't realize this is happening. These same kinds of discussions are happening around the world, and so I think that's fascinating. So astrology, unless a country's chart is particularly vulnerable, astrology is not limited to one country or one nation. Although, let's say if um, the U.S. has a Sagittarius rising, which I believe it does, there are going to be all these lawsuits, okay, bouncing back and forth because we have all these planets in the sixth house. There's going to be all this anger around politics lasting for another couple of months because of Mars being in the fifth house. And there's still what I would call domestic unrest. So it's that push for reform, for further reform, and a certain stubbornness in entertainment and politics, but a lot of dissatisfaction and a lot of disinterest in government functioning the way it normally does. So I think these are going to be interesting times, but that's happening across the world. It's happening in the UK, it's happening in France, it's even happening in countries like China, India. President Modi, I said last week, had avoided the being elected out of office, but he had to form a coalition government. It was the first time he had to do that. So even people with the strongest popular support are encountering some challenges to their authority. And this will continue at least for, oh gosh, I say at least for another 5 years, to be honest, but it'll be particularly intense over the next two. All right, so let's go back to the chart again, and let's see what's happening. So again, we have Leo in the first house at the time I'm recording today. Saturn's in the seventh house. Again, I can't help but focus on that comet that's coming in October. Comets usually mean people in power losing their positions, but again, it's what's called a green comet. That's a little bit different, so I'll give you an analysis of that a little bit more next week. And also Saturn and Mars. So Ukraine has been given permission to bomb Russian sites, which I'm not happy about, to be honest with you, because that does mean an escalation of the war, of the conflict over there. And Rahu's in the eighth, so there are people behind the scenes trying to disrupt things, and that's true from both sides of the political fence, or all sides of the culture. It isn't just conspiracies. It isn't just something as simple as that. There's a large dissatisfaction of where the culture is going on both sides. And like I said, I haven't seen anything quite like this since the late 60s. So where we had the campaign of, it reminds me, like I said many times, it reminds me a great deal of the presidential campaign of 1968 in the United States, but that was also a time in which there were various student strikes and student demonstrations around the world. And there is a year system in Vedic astrology, which unfortunately I have to look up again to let you know what year we're in, but it's a 60-year cycle. So basically, we're in essentially the same cycle we were in around 1964, and but the Saturn transits are closer to, they're a little bit closer to 1967, 68. So I think one of the things we're going to find interesting is how we adapt to these particular things. And again, keep in mind, we keep focusing as a society on the internet. Artificial intelligence is doing extraordinarily well. That's the Jupiter-Venus-Sun conjunction in Taurus. But there was also a lot of concern that television and other mass media were ruining the minds of kids back in the 1960s, 1950s, and 1960s. So if you're old enough, you can see certain cycles repeating themselves. The internet is a much more rapid mode of and less, and I would say both more and less focused than the 1960s were. So the 1960s essentially encouraged groups to align. The internet allows for greater subdivisions of groups. So it's formed groups, but there are rival groups within those groups, if you know what I mean. So the subdivisions are a little bit more, they're easier to trace than they were in the 1960s. So getting back to it, Saturn is in the 7th house, aspect in the 1st house, does indicate some slowing down of the economy. Again, I've said this before, and I will still say this to my dying day, that jobs figures do not reflect a slowing down of the economy, but other factors do, okay? I think the Saturn-Mars aspect will slow down real estate over the next couple of months. It'll still be a good couple of months for real estate because Mars is in its own sign. And I think when Mars hits Taurus, you'll see a more steady slowing of real estate. The other thing to keep in mind, and again, this is also a factor that people are using real estate differently than they did in previous epochs. So there's a big bed and breakfast boom in the United States. There hasn't been as much construction. We have a large immigrant population coming in. All these things are keeping the supply of houses or the supply of housing tight. So that's going to drive up prices. That's only logical. So that Saturn aspect on Mars will continue to fuel inflation in the land market. And the Saturn aspect on Mars, despite people's best efforts to do otherwise, will continue to fuel the price of gasoline and raw materials. So I don't see inflation going away anytime soon. The Jupiter-Venus conjunction over here, there was a slight panic last week, the end of last week, if I recall correctly, in the stock market. But I think that overall, this combination will give what I would call an optimistic surge in July, and then kind of what I would call a reality check. I'm sorry, a surge in June into mid-July, and then what I would call a reality check in late July to late August, to all the way through August. So at least from the chart, I think you'll see Moon is in the 11th house. 12th house. So again, people are spending too much, or people are getting far too much in debt. Mercury is already 11th house. So again, that does give some increased financial gains to people, which is a good thing. But again, it'll come through part-time work or shiftable jobs. So you'll see a lot of jobs shifting. The moon is interesting because, and again, Saturn aspecting the 9th house of this chart is not good for people in power or people in government overall. It's kind of an embarrassing combination. It really doesn't do well for people trying to usurp them either, because they'll be caught in embarrassing situations as well. So this is something to be kept in mind. But in terms of how it affects the economy will do well for, I would say, until mid-July, then show signs of weakness. There have already been large chains of stores which have been closing. And again, that's being taken up by online business to a very large extent. So that's not necessarily worrying to the larger economy. But a lot of the new jobs being created are part-time jobs. That's not, I'm not saying that to be negative. I'm saying that to be truthful. So I think that it's sustainable in the short run. I don't know if it's sustainable in the long run. So I'm not a pessimist by nature. I've seen bad economic cycles before. But I think, and I think it's really understandable that people would want to put the economy in a good light, not only for political reasons, but also so people don't get afraid. And I would encourage people not to get afraid. But I think that it's going to be an interesting few months in terms of both the economy, politics, even entertainment. Essentially because basically the film industry is doing poorly overall. And I think you'll see shifts in the entertainment business, but it won't come for about a year. It's already starting now, but the serious shifts won't come for about a year. So let's talk about more domestic violence, Saturn aspect, Mars, unfortunately. So let's talk about your individual charts, make it a little happier. Basically, for Aries, Mars is in the 1st house. So that makes the sign very dynamic, very aggressive. Saturn's aspecting Mars, so we'll want to make sure that things are being taken care of properly. It has a lot of planets in the 2nd house. So this is a good time for wealth. But again, this astrological sign will be spending too much. Moon is in the 3rd house, affects the 4th house, so changes in home environment possible for this sign, or changes to home. K2's in the 6th house, a lot of pointless arguments, some health issues. Saturn's in the 11th, so friendships will be a little bit conservative or a little bit restrained. So let's move on to, I've already spoken about Rahu in the 12th. That means what I would call obsessive spending. For Taurus has a lot of planets in the 1st house. It's sort of in Adani Yoga, which is a wealth-producing combination, and also let me just see now. and also a Raj Yoga combination with Venus and Mercury, both in the first house, along with the fourth house lord of the sun. So this should be a good week for Taurus in terms of increasing financial strength, fame, notoriety, increased discipline. Moon is in the second house. That gives increased desire for wealth. Ketu's in the fifth. Children will be a little bit misbehaved. Saturn's in the 10th. A lot of good career growth for this particular sign, but and some famous friendships. But Mars is in the 12th, so a lot of spending on property, a lot of disappointment with relationship partners. For Gemini has Moon in the first house, so this sign will get a lot more attention than normal. There is a fear of loss that will pass within about 2 weeks at the outside. This sign will actually become very prominent, it'll start to draw more money in, more fame by mid-June. And you'll also see, I think, some disruption in home life, some detachment from home life, problems with kids because kids will be a focal point for them. But the situation with children will improve a great deal actually within about 5 days. Seventh house lord is Jupiter, lord of the seventh, is in the 12th. So relationship life kind of on hold for the time being, not really satisfactory. Maybe even some potential for change of relationship partner. Ninth house has Saturn in it, so this sign will have some mobility issues. Rahu in the 10th, Mars in the 11th, so some mobility issues, but overall some increased fame or recognition for this sign. But again, a little bit too much spending this week, but that'll change next week. For Cancer, Cancer's Lord is placed in the 12th house. So there'll be a sort of like a lot of work behind the scenes, but good financial gains for this sign and extraordinary financial life for this sign because we have several wealth producing combinations for this chart, for this sign. Ketu's in the second house. Ketu's in the third house. Good for setting goals and renewing goals. Rahu's in the ninth house, maybe a little bit unrealistic about the goals it's setting, but it's better to try for too much than try for too little. Saturn's in the eighth house. So again, this is kind of a rebuilding of the person's life pattern. That'll conclude around 2005, the end of 2005. And the person will come out of it much more famous, much more well-known than they are right now. Mars is in the 10th house, very good for financial gain, again, and for career. So overall, not a bad week for Cancer. Some problems, though, especially with relationships, and especially with both Gemini and Cancer have problems with relationship life. For Leos have Saturn in the 7th house, so relationship life may be disrupted a little bit this week because of Saturn going through the 7th house. This sign is in danger of having its relationship life. I'm trying to think of the right way to put it. Having its relationship life suspended or feeling detached from its relationship partners. Mars is in Rahu's in the 8th house. This sign will seem very attractive to people. Ketu's in the 2nd. Communication will be hard for this sign. Wealth will come, but it'll go quickly as well. Moon is in the 11th. So again, money comes in, but it tends to flow out because the moon rules the 12th house of loss. Career-wise, though, the sign should do phenomenally well because you have a cluster of planets in the 10th house, so it'll get a lot of fame or a lot of recognition. Uh, the best planet for this rising sign is Mars, and that's placed in the ninth house. Although it is aspected by Saturn, it does give a kind of a Raj Yoga with special partnerships coming into existence. Rahu's in the eighth house, excuse me. This sign will have to watch out for addictive relationships, or for buying too much, or for getting addicted to certain behavioral patterns. But overall, not a bad week for Leo either. Virgo is kind of interesting because Virgo has the sun at 19 degrees 8 minutes. That actually infuses a certain amount of energy in this sign because it's hitting towards the middle of the sign. And Ketu's sort of a fearless planet. It really doesn't care how much money it has. It cares about freedom. It cares about doing the right thing. It cares about it's kind of a selfless placement for this sign. Also extraordinarily intuitive. It can bore people with planets in the sign. It can make them feel kind of unmotivated, or kind of lackadaisical about their career pursuits. That's one downside to it. But the positive side to this is whether or not they're excited about their career pursuits, they'll actually get new career pursuits because of the moon in the 10th house, leading to financial gains. And you have a lot of planets in the ninth house, so it's actually a lucky week for a lucky couple of weeks for Virgo. So you'll actually see increases of people seeking this sign's advice, supervisors coming into this sign's life, opportunities for travel, or opportunities for long distance communication. Mars is in the eighth. So the downsides of that is it can make this sign a little bit more prone to being abused by relationship partners. This is true for Sun, Moon, a rising sign of Virgo, if you're in a relationship, or even business partners. And Rahu's in the seventh house, so it's going to give a slight dissatisfaction with relationship partners. Rahu moving through the seventh house is not really a relationship breaking planet. People around the end of 2025 with planets in Virgo will have to watch out for that, though, because Rahu and Saturn will be together actually around the end of 2024. To be honest, you'll start to see signs of this because Rahu and Saturn will be together, and it could create a separation. That's kind of a potent combination. But as long as you realize that Rahu is going to give you the illusion that there's something better somewhere else, you'll ride through this pretty well. I'm more worried about Saturn entering the seventh house in 2025, to be honest with you, because that is a difficult time for relationships. But it does mean new partnerships and new business activities. The other downsides to Saturn in the sixth house is there is this feeling about giving up on business ventures or wanting to change business direction. Venus, as Lord of the second house, is in the ninth house, very good for financial gains. So is Mercury as the 11th house, as the first house Lord in the 10th house. So this is what they call a Raj Yoga in Vedic astrology, a Raj and Dana Yoga. So that's very good for the sign financially. Saturn is in the sixth house. Mars is in the eighth house. There will be, like I said, more potential for fights and arguments with this sign. Also, people with Virgo rising, there'll be memory problems, or Virgo sun or moon. There'll be memory issues, or you'll drop the ball on certain things. And as long as you check yourself a few times a day, you'll be okay. But that's just sort of a heads up. Uh, for Libra, Libra has Mars in the seventh house. So again, we have relationship issues, more fights, more arguments. But you have unexpected gains coming from unexpected sources because of this combination of planets in the eighth house. And when this combination of planets, Mercury, Venus, and Sun in particular, moves to the ninth house within about a week, Venus and Sun in particular, it will actually increase this sign's potential for gains over the summer months. And career gains will be very strong for the sign. Okay. Right now, the more you focus on career and teaching, the better off you'll be for the sign. Saturn's in the fifth house. Again, hard work, study always pays off when you have this kind of a combination. And again, one of the things that I've noticed about this particular combination is you'll feel kind of dumb or even humiliated at certain points because of things you don't know. But take my word for it, you'll grow a great deal from learning who to abandon as friends or who to align with as friends from this particular placement. Rahu is in the sixth house. The sixth house Lord does give the potential for enemies or active enemies, especially among the teaching community. And we've already spoken about Mars in the seventh house. Actually, it's good for leadership. These two combinations are good for leadership for the sign. So you may find yourself drawn to some kind of past leadership position you've had or desiring new leadership, and it will come. For Scorpio has a bunch of planets in the seventh house. This can make it prone to affairs or prone to relationship problems. But there'll be more of a focus on career life because of all these planets connected with the 10th house of career. And I think you'll see a lot of financial growth for this sign this week. Jupiter is the second house Lord. That's a Dana Yoga. Okay. Second and fifth house Lord in the seventh house creates new potential for partnerships, new financial growth. And also from this chart, you have Saturn in the fourth house with a lot more responsibilities connected with home. Certain people have planets which are high in degree, and those can act like a third kind of or fourth kind of ascendant. So you have the rising sign, which is a sign which is rising in the eastern horizon when you're born, and you really need to look up an astrology program to figure that out. And the sun and the moon are considered ascendants, but sometimes the Abhakaraka planet, the planet which is highest in degree regardless of the sign is placed in. So let's say you have a planet that's placed at, let's say, 29 degrees or 28 degrees in your chart. That's going to be the Abhakaraka planet. So the Abhakaraka planet tends to be connected with the personality. Is sort of like a substitute rising sign of the person. And so a lot of people will have the Abhakaraka planet in different signs than the signs that I'm listing. So if you can look that up either through me or through a competent Indian astrology program, do so. That planet becomes really important, and you should consider that as also another rising sign, depending on the major planetary period you're in. Okay, so the second house. So again, wealth-producing combination. We've said that before. Saturn's in the fourth, stress in home life, arguments at home too. Rahu's in the fifth house. children are a little bit greedy. That hasn't changed a lot over the past few months. It's not going to change for quite a few more months. And moon is in the 8th. So there's this kind of like feeling of depression or being a little bit down for this sign this week. That won't last more than about a day. Let's go to, so overall, not a bad week for Scorpio, just some tension in home life. For Sagittarius, you have Jupiter in the 6th house, so you'll see a lot of focus on court cases. This is the United States chart, litigation, rumors, slander, all those other things, and enemies, okay? Saturn is in the 3rd house, so there'll be a determination to move forward. Saturn's in a fixed sign, and Saturn is aspecting Mars, so this will give increased aggression with children or increased aggression on the part of children. All these planets in the 6th house is good for overcoming enemies, but you have a lot of enemies. Moon is in the 7th house. That will give a change of alliances. So essentially, you'll see a shift in alliances or a shift. And K2's in the 10th house. Not much recognition in career, but again, success. If you don't look for fame and recognition, you'll get recognized. That may sound paradoxical, but it's true with K2 in the 10th. Okay? With Capricorn, Capricorn has Saturn in the 2nd house. That's a good placement. It gives increased wealth. It has, excuse me, forget it for that error. All right, so let me get this back on screen. Saturn's, and we have Venus, Jupiter, and Sun in the 5th house, so that's good for financial growth. Mars, again, some fighting or arguments in home life. People will want things just a little too perfect. Moon is in the 6th. People will be moody and will be prone to disagreement. K2's in the 9th house, unexpected shifts and changes in luck. So you may get one assignment taken away from you and you may be thrown into an entirely different assignment. Or you may lose a boss or lose a sponsor. For Aquarius, now for most Aquarians, this is going to be, now this is Vedic Aquarius, so this is roughly, I'm going to sneeze. This is roughly so complete unedited February 15th through March 15th. And it'll give this sign, or people who have planets with this sign, a sort of a hesitant leadership role. That's perhaps the best way I can put it, because Saturn in this sign doesn't like to be telling other people what to do, but it's going to be forced into that position. And we have, let me just look through this, and I should have mentioned this earlier, excuse me. We have 1, 2, 3 planets in their own signs. So that's increases the attributes of Saturn, Mars, and Venus. Next, over the next couple of weeks, we'll have 3 planets. So for about 1 week, we won't have that. We'll have just Saturn and Mars stuck where they are. But Mercury will move into its own sign in about 2 weeks' time. And that'll make communications flow much more smoothly, much more aggressively. So Saturn aspecting Mars, aspecting the 12th house or the 6th house in this chart. So some potential for arguments or discussions. Rahu's in the second house. The sign will do a lot of complaining about what its situation is. Mars is in the third house, but it will have a lot of courage. It will have a lot of ambition. Jupiter and Venus in the fourth house. A lot of focus on home life and family life, and especially on relationship partners. So this isn't necessarily a bad placement. And K2 relationship partners will be very critical or forgetful. So this isn't a bad placement. It's just a little bit awkward for Aquarius. So you'll be put in the position of both being dictator and dictated to this week. For Pisces, which is our last sign, and we save the best for last, Rahu is in the first house. So again, this kind of goes in line with this sign will be changing its belief systems or dissatisfied with its belief systems. Relationship partners will be difficult or tough to communicate with or seem a little distant. There'll be more fights at home because Mars is in the second house. However, we have this combination of planets in the third house, which will make this particular sign very ambitious for money and status, and even wanting to change relationship partners. And let's see now, let's go over here. And the last significant placements are there'll be a lot of emphasis on children and home life for this chart, and also just too much money being spent on family life because of Saturn being in the 12th house. So let's go to maybe almost too much being spent on entertainments and luxuries, because that's also a house of hidden pleasure. So try to watch your wallet this month. So let's go to the astro mapping. Oh, it worked at first try. I'm so happy. Okay, so Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter are over the Hawaiian Islands right now. So you'll be seeing a lot of government investigation, a lot of focus on those islands. Unfortunately, maybe some flooding because of Venus and Jupiter being so close together. Maybe some court cases because of the way the islands are situated right now. There's a Saturn line going right through, going very close to the Venus line. And so that will probably raise the cost of living for that already expensive area. Rahu going through California, Oregon, and Washington State, and also Nevada. So you'll see some political scandals and some pretty big name political scandals occurring in these states. Interestingly enough, I know that Governor Newsom had to back off from the minimum wage, but I'm not sure how significant that is a factor. And let's see now, we have Mars going right through the middle of Mexico. I don't know if I didn't predict the president would be a woman in Mexico, but I did predict the governor would win the party or the nomination in Puerto Rico correctly. But Mars over here, this indicates a lot of violence, unfortunately, in Mexico and also in this area right here, between these areas right here. So that's potentially a dangerous area. If we go over to the east coast of the United States, we see a Jupiter line going through Maine, very close to Massachusetts, where I am. You see a little cross is where I am. And also hitting down into close to Washington, D.C., down through the Dominican Republic and Haiti, and also through Venezuela, down into Colombia, down into Bolivia, down into Peru, down into Chile, and Argentina. So this Jupiter line indicates reform. There'll be a lot of communications, a lot of discussions about it, especially in Guyana. Guyana is going to be in the news over the next few weeks because we have all these lines running through Guyana. I saw a documentary on Guyana. Essentially, it's really just this part of the country. The countries are developed. A lot of the interior is really it's really inhospitable for humans or for most people. And let's see now, Sun, Venus, Mercury is very dangerous too. There's a Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mercury line and a Jupiter line running all through Brazil and a Saturn line running through Brazil. So I'm thinking what we're seeing is kind of a government crackdown in Brazil because of these lines, and maybe even in Uruguay and Paraguay. There's a line, there's a moon line running through. Also, I did want to talk about the government. This is essentially, this part right here is essentially, and these parts right here are like the economic powerhouses of the United States. It doesn't mean there's nothing happening here or here. There's a lot of economic power in Texas, but these are like the commerce centers of the country. And also the government centers of the country are pretty much around this area. So the Jupiter line down here tends to indicate to me that especially the media will be trying to preserve the established order. And you'll see a lot of that going on down in Brazil and into Uruguay and Paraguay. Moon is going through close to Iceland, along with Rahu. So there may be some panic up in Iceland. I'm not sure it's going to constitute an economic panic for them, or else just something connected with the politics of the area. But I'm going to say both. There's a Mars line running through London, Norway, Paris, pretty much, and Spain and Morocco, and Western Africa over here, Guyana down to the Ivory Coast, or Ghana down to the Ivory Coast, excuse me. And I'm thinking that this part, we're going to see a lot of violence in this part of the world overall because of Mars, and also a lot because of changes that people want to bring about to government. Now, we don't have any significant lines coming up again until we hit Jupiter running through Sudan, Egypt, Turkey. And so this should give flooding in these parts of the world, oddly enough, and also up through Moscow. So, and Ukraine. So this is Jupiter. Jupiter's a war planet, by the way. So just keep that in mind. So that's why Ukraine was given permission to bomb Russia. So a lot of people don't know that about Jupiter. Jupiter is intimately connected with war. And there's a Mercury line running through Syria. And let me just see this. So it's moving up towards, I believe that's Israel is right here. So we have, I'm sorry, this section over here. So this is Jupiter line. So the conflict in Israel won't calm down anytime soon, to be honest. And there'll be a lot of news about it. Syria and Iran look like they're kind of disrupted as well. A lot of news out of Iran, possibly because of the president just being lost, but also out of Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates. We have in an Iran line is running through, or a sun line is running close to Pakistan and Afghanistan. That to me means shift of government, or the government essentially trying to control things and not doing too good a job of it. There's a Mars line intersecting a moon line right in very near Delhi. Delhi is more like over here, if I recall correctly. But basically, this will give some increased visibility to the government. And this moon line, and again, I am concerned about India getting into a conflict this year. Maybe I'm a little bit overly concerned, but this Mars line has been strong on India over the past few months. So let's see now. There's a moon line running into China, but it's not affecting much else other than India and China. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me see now. Let's see now. We also have a Jupiter line running through China and close to Vietnam and close to Borneo and Indonesia. So that again could indicate political disruption in those parts of the world. And also down to Australia, we'll be hearing a lot more from Australia. There's a Sun-Venus conjunction in the western part of Australia. So there will be some scandal connected with show business down there. And also there's a Sun-Venus line hitting Korea, which could indicate shifting governments for that part of the world. There's a Saturn line running through Japan, so it could indicate the slowing down of the Japanese economy. And finally, there's a Rahu line running over the far east coast of Australia and New Guinea and a Mars line running through New Zealand. So I don't think New Zealand is going to get into a war, but there could be some domestic violence there. But I think you'll see some government scandals in Australia coming up over the next few weeks. So that's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed it, or at least gained a little bit of information from it. In the meanwhile, don't worry about a thing. Things will get better, especially over the summertime. And I love you all. Take care of yourselves. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. We're slowly building an audience, slowly but surely. Okay? So God bless you all for watching. I love you all. Thank you very much. And your comments and ideas and the interchange are always welcome. Okay? Thanks a lot, folks. See you real soon. Bye-bye now.